Hey everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery, once more coming to you from the camper, and this time we are on video 4 of our 4-part series on how to set up the Z6iii for wildlife photography. And once again, I do want to remind you that this is just a fraction of what you'll find in the book. I almost feel a little bit bad about doing these videos because there's so much more information in the book. Plus, we cover more menus like the Playback menu and how to use my menu and all that good stuff. Plus, we look at a lot of alternative setups that I think many of you are going to be interested in, especially for this video, because I have a lot of stuff that I'm going to show you in this video, kind of how I set it up, but I go over so many more options in the setup guides, options that I know you're going to like. So make sure you check that out. If it's September, check the site. It might be up for sale already. If it's not September, get over to the site anyway. Sign up for the free email newsletter so you know when it comes out. And once again, if you're looking for the other 3 videos in the series, check out the description area below here on YouTube, and let's jump in. Okay, so we're going to go to our controls section of our custom menu. Jump in there. And the first item is customize our eye menu. I want to show you that for some reason sometimes causes confusion. I think because it looks so similar to the regular eye menu, you don't really think you're in a configuration area. But let me show you that. I'm going to jump in here. And by the way, I took the liberty to kind of save about 5 minutes of scrolling time while I struggle to find each one of these little items. I took the liberty of presetting this. This is how my camera is normally set, except for this first one. That's usually vibration reduction. So I'm going to show you how to set that first, and then I'll go over why I have what I have in here. So this looks a lot like the eye menu, but this is where we set our eye menu. And each one of these items in here is an individual, think of it as a slot that has a menu under it where you pick the item that goes into it. Now, where I think people get confused with this is they try to move the different icons around here, like I want metering over where white balance is right now. So they can't do it. And they're like, well, how do I move that? This doesn't work. Something's wrong. No, what you have to do is you have to select the item that you want to change, and then you change it. And then if you have it duplicated on there, like let's say I change white balance here to metering. Let me show you. So if I go in here, see I get this big long menu. Let's say I change that to metering. Well, now I have metering here, and I have it 2 slots over as well, right? So if I want to change this, I need to come back over here, and then I go to the menu and I change that. So that's how that works. But right now I want that on metering. And the first item I actually really put in here, though, is vibration reduction. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to scroll through here. It's handy sometimes just to scroll with the back dial here, that main command dial. There's vibration reduction. Hit OK. And then that is set. So basically what I do when I'm setting up this menu is I'm thinking about all of the stuff that's the most important to me, and I'm putting that on the left-hand side. And the least important stuff, because there's a lot of slots, let's face it, we're not going to need all of these, right? The least important stuff I sort of shove over to the right. That way my most frequently used eye menu items are over here on the left, and it's not as frustrating to use the eye menu. You press the eye menu, and what you need is usually just it's either selected already or it's just a little joystick bump away. So I recommend keeping all your most important stuff to the left. And let's talk about what this is briefly. So vibration reduction, obviously that's a big one. Sometimes we're shutting it off, sometimes we're switching from sport to normal, so I like to have that there. I also have focus tracking with lock on. That looks like this in the menu. And that is that item we looked at in the last video that controls our block shot AF response. We went over that extensively, but again, that's not a set it and forget it setting, so I like to have it on tap. Another one over here is silent mode. And again, that's what it looks like there in the menu. I like to have that on tap in case I want to go into silent mode. I have my release mode here, so I can set my various release mode speeds. I can be at 20 frames a second, 14, whatever. It's not something I do very often. Again, I'm usually at 20 frames per second, but because of the electronic shutter, sometimes I do want to drop to 14 if I'm concerned about rolling shutter. Metering over here, and again, just says metering there on the menu. You saw that earlier. Pretty self-explanatory. That lets you change your metering pattern. Next, we have focus shift shooting. Looks like that on the menu, and you can see where the little scroll bars are there too when I'm showing you these if you're trying to find them on your own. Focus shift shooting's handy because I do little macros and things like that, so I like to have focus shift shooting handy right there. Sometimes I change my image area, and that one's all the way at the top if you're looking for it on the menu. Sometimes I change my image area, so that's handy to have. Not very often, as I say, as I'm moving to the right, less important stuff. This is my shutter type, so if I want to switch to something like auto from electronic shutter, I can do it there, and it just kind of sort of towards the bottom of the menu there. Focus peaking. Sometimes I want to change the color of my focus peaking. Maybe it's not showing up very well against whatever subject I'm using, and maybe I'm really using it for focus, and again, we talked about that in the last video, and it just says focus peaking there. We also have autofocus, manual focus. So if I want to go into manual focus mode for some reason using the I menu, I can do it. If for the most part, again, that's kind of a not my favorite feature there, but again, towards the right, nothing else to stick in that slot. AF area mode and subject detection. Now this seems like it should be more towards the left, but I set a button, this video record button up here, I set a button to change my AF area modes, and I also have subject detection on a menu item that I can access with this display button, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So these are not that's not the most important thing, but again, I have to fill slots, right? And the other one is monitor viewfinder brightness. Normally, once I set those in the setup menu, I'm done, and you can watch how you do that in the first video. But, I have it here just in case, and basically because I didn't have much else to put there. And truthfully, there are other items you can put in this I menu that are very useful. And I go over all of the popular I menu items for wildlife photographers in the setup guide. So there's more than just this. There might be some other ones that you might find more useful than what I've put in here. But at any rate, once you're done, hit menu, and it backs you back out to controls there. So let's jump back in here, and let's get to the part everybody is waiting for, the control setup, right? How do I set all of these buttons in the camera? And once again, I have taken the liberty of presetting this stuff so you don't have to watch me struggle through the menus to try to find all this stuff. And I'll just kind of briefly go over what I do, why I do it, and that here in the video. But again, the book goes in a lot more detail and offers a lot more suggestions for these setup buttons. This is basically right now how I have the camera set up. I've only had it for a while. This, again, I think I mentioned in an earlier video, this is a loaner from Nikon. This has worked out really well the way I have this set up right now. Although this first one I do have to set because I do want to show you how that works. But everything else in here is set the way I normally set it. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how this works. Okay, so the first thing I want you to notice is as you scroll around in here, you can see that it'll show you the position of that button on the camera or on the grip. So that's kind of handy to know if you're wondering which button Nikon's referring to, because some of these are a little bit confusing the way they're named. So anyhow, let's go ahead, and the first one here is the one we're going to set. Everything else, again, has been preset. So I'm going to give this a click. And what I like, this is the Fn1 button. This is prime real estate. This is one of my favorites here. So I use this as an AF override. So I'm going to go up here, and we have a couple of options for that. We have AF area mode and AF area mode plus AF on. But let's talk about what this does first. So what this is this allows you to override your current AF area. So you're going to select an AF area through your menu or by using a button that you program that I'm going to show you here in a moment. But let's say you need a different AF area right on the spot. You can press a button if you have it assigned this way, and it will override to whatever AF area mode you want it to. So for example, we're going to set Fn1, in my case, to auto AF. And if I press my Fn1 button, as long as I'm holding that button down, I'm going to be in auto AF. So let's say I'm in wide AF, and suddenly I want to have the whole screen available for tracking. I do that a lot. I'll maybe pick up a bird with wide AF, and then I'll override to auto so I have the entire screen for the thing to fly around in. So what I do is I pick it up with wide, and then I press my Fn1 button, hold it down, and it keeps it in auto. And when I'm done, I release the Fn1 button, it goes back to wide. So that's the idea here. Now we have two options here though. The first is AF area mode, and the other is AF area mode plus AF on. Now, I like just AF area mode because I want to control focus at all times with my little AF on button back here. There are times I'm overriding and I don't necessarily want the camera to focus yet. Maybe I want to tweak manual focus, or maybe I'm just not ready for the camera to start focusing, and maybe in a tricky situation and I'm worried the camera's going to miss focus, and I want to make sure that I'm the one initiating, okay? So I just go AF area mode, and then I keep control of focus myself. Other people swear by the AF area mode plus AF on. They want to press that, and they want it to change the area mode and start focusing. Up to you, however you want to do it. I go for this option here, and I'm going to select Auto AF Area, but you can see we can select anything we want out of this menu, but I like Auto AF Area. 3D is a good second choice. Sometimes it's even a better choice. Just depends on what you're using and how you're using the camera. For me personally, I find that overall, if I'm doing an override, usually Auto AF is usually more important to me. So I'm going to go like that. And I talk about the difference between using auto AF and 3D AF in the book, and then especially like for birds in flight, applications there, as far as which one to use and why one is better than the other in some circumstances. Next we have the Fn2 button, and I have that set to AF area once again and single point AF. And the main reason for that is simple. There are times that I'm photographing something. Usually I have subject detection turned on. So maybe I'm using like a wide AF area, and I find that subject detection is wandering around too much, or I'm using 3D or auto and it's wandering around too much. and I need a quick way to pinpoint the eye and get rid of subject detection all in one fell swoop, and that's what this does. Single point AF does not support subject detection. So if I'm in a situation, usually this is for a static subject, obviously, but if I'm in a situation where subject detection is wandering all over the animal and I'm not getting the shot I want, I can just press the Fn2 button, jump to single point, move it to the eye, fire away, and I don't have to worry about the camera overriding it with subject detection, focusing on the shoulder or something. So I like to have that there on tap with this particular camera. Now with the Z8 Z9, I set it up a little bit differently, and there are other options that you'll want to consider for this one as well, but this is how I have it set currently. It's been working out pretty well for me. Next we have the function button for vertical shooting, and that is set to exposure compensation. I like that because I like to mimic my grip with my controls up here. And I have exposure compensation here. I'm going to have exposure compensation there. I like to have that handy. I have AF on set to AF on because I'm a back button focus shooter. If you're not, if you use shutter release, this is prime real estate. And again, you might want to think of something else. And I do give a ton of examples in the book for things that you might want to try instead. The release mode protect button up in the upper left-hand corner. Again, as I said earlier and in earlier videos, most of the time I'm at 20 frames a second, continuous extended high. So I don't change that too terribly often. So I hate to see that button go to waste. So I put display on it so I can switch from one display screen to the next rather than using this button to do it. So I use it for that. And works out pretty well because it's kind of out of the way. It's not a prime real estate button, but I could still change my display. One thing I wish Nikon would do is maybe put display on the eye menu so I could, I don't know, change displays there. Show me a little icon like they do in the setup menu. And anyway, next we have the display button itself, and I have that set to access the top item in my menu because for me that's way more useful. So what I do here, I'll show you what that looks like there in the menu. So what I have is the subject detection option in my menu. In fact, let me show you here. I'm going to go back to the menu here. I'm going to go all the way down to my menu, and you can see I have the subject detection options item set there in my menu. That's the top item, and that's what's important because if I go back to controls and I have my display button set. So this means if I press my display button, let me show you what happens. So if I press my display button, I get this menu right here so I can shut it off. I can go to animal, I can go to auto, people, whatever I want to do. But I have instant access to my subject detection options just by pressing that display button. Go back to the menu here for you. So that's pretty cool. The next one is the sub-selector center. That's the joystick. So I'll tell you what, I found the joystick press to be not great. I have put AF overrides on it before, and basically I press in to get the override, and the AF point kind of moves across the screen because I'm not very good at keeping it in the center. So I put something a little less critical on this one, and I duplicate it again on the grip. And mine is save focus position. So I'm going to give that a press here. We'll go in here, and basically what this does, it's easier to explain this with a scenario, and the book explains this a lot better than I have time for in the video. One of these days I think I'll do a dedicated video on how to use this. But basically, let's say you're in a situation and you have a nesting bird and you have birds flying around too, and you want to shoot both. Okay, so what I do is I focus on the nest, I save my focus position, I use another button, the lens function 2 button, to recall that focus position later if I need it. But I'll focus on the nest, and then maybe I'm shooting these birds as they're flying by, having a great old time. I see one of the ones coming in with nesting material, I know he's about to land, so I will press my recall button, my lens function 2, because I set it with this button, and then I use my lens function 2 button to recall that focus position, and the lens will snap back to that position where the nest was, and that allows me to very quickly get on the bird with my autofocus. Now here's the thing, a lot of people think, oh, then it's sharp if you do that. No, that's not how it works. Basically it gets you close, and that's the trick with mirrorless autofocus, or one of the many tricks I talk about in the book with mirrorless autofocus, is that the closer you are to having the subject more or less sharp, the easier and more reliably the autofocus system in the camera is going to latch on. So rather than me shooting a bird that's up close and then seeing that one coming in and maybe having the autofocus overshoot it or get on the background or whatever, if I recall that focus position and it goes straight to that nest and that bird's roughly or very close to the same focal plane, or at least recognizable from a focus standpoint, the camera's going to latch right on, versus maybe or maybe not if it's way out of focus. So that's one of the ways I use it. Another way I use this is for closer subjects. If you have something like hummingbirds, if you've ever done that, you know it's very easy for the lens to go hunting to the background. So what I'll do is I'll lock focus and save focus on the feeder or where flower or whatever it is that the hummingbird is coming to, but I'll lock focus there and I'll save it. I'll press the save focus position button, my joystick. So I have that in the camera's memory. And then I keep my finger kind of right on my recall button, the lens function 2 button, or the save focus position button. I use that one for it too. But I'll have my finger right there ready to go. And if the lens starts focusing towards the background, I just press the recall button and it'll bring it right back for me. So that is very, very handy. That's probably, honestly, maybe even my bigger use for this function. So anyway, it's not something I use all the time, so I kind of put on buttons that are maybe a little bit farther away or that are a little bit harder to work with. I use this for, but yeah, it works. But we have a couple options under save focus position. For right now, we're just going to do save to all. So when I press this, it's going to save my focus distance to all of my buttons that are set to recall focus distance. So, okay, save to all. Again, the book shows how to save individually and all that stuff, but I think that gives you the basic idea. I don't want to turn this into a video tutorial on saving focus position. Hopefully that kind of gets you started. So the OK button, that's to the default of reset. It'll recenter the AF area there. Playback button's still set to playback because I like to look at my images. The AF on button on the grip set to the same as the AF on button up here, and that's just the default there, so I'll leave that alone. And the joystick, the vertical multi-selector, set to, again, save that focus position. Exposure compensation is still set to exposure compensation. A lot of these buttons I'm just leaving alone, you can see. Now here's a big one though. This is the video record button. This is where I like to put my AF area mode. So what I do is I select this option here, focus mode / AF area mode. And what that allows me to do is press this button and turn a dial to change my AF area modes and my focus modes. So I can, right now I have the camera set, I'll show you how I do this. I have the camera set for this dial back here, the main command dial. I can turn that when I'm pressing this button and it will switch from all my AF areas. So from single point to wide to 3D to auto, all that. And that makes it very easy to have access to those other AF areas and not have to go to the I menu or sort around through the photo shooting menu or something silly like that. Now another thing I do is I change this command dial, change the setting here, the focus AF area mode selection. I reverse these. Normally, this one actually changes AF area mode, meaning AFS, AFC, or manual focus, and this one changes AF areas. I like this to change AF areas. For some reason, this is more intuitive to me, and it prevents mistakes. So I like to use that one. So I just switch these. That is very much personal preference, though. So do it if you want. ISO button changes ISO. Here's our lens function too. This is the one that recalls that focus position. So I've set it with this one, and then I can use the lens function 2 button, which is kind of the traditional place for this on long lenses, to recall that focus position. So that's all you have to do is just hit that. I use the regular lens function button for something called preview. With Nikon lenses, when you stop down past f5.6, you don't actually see the depth of field for like f8, f11, f16, whatever. So I like to have a preview option on there, and I use it on the lens function button because it's right there and handy, and I can keep my eye to the viewfinder real well. Because what I like to do, I am all about subject isolation. So what I like to do is if I'm in a situation where I know I'm going to have to stop down a little bit to get a little bit deeper depth of field, get a little bit more sharpness throughout my subject range on their body, or if there's maybe a couple of them that are close and I want to catch the other one with depth of field, I want to see what that's doing to the subject, but I also want to see what that's doing to the background, because as you stop down, of course, that background changes. So keeping that pressed in as I change my depth of field, as I change my aperture, allows me to kind of pre-visualize that. And it works really well. This is kind of like the depth of field preview we had in DSLRs and on our film cameras, except that this one doesn't suck because you have the EVF and it's nice and bright and you can actually see it. It's actually useful. And this allows me to kind of make those compromises with my depth of field. So I like to have that one on there. Lens function rings, I have them both shut off, the left and right. Now, the only two lenses that have these are the 600TC and the 400TC. Okay, this is not the control ring, these are the function rings, and I forget that it's even on there. I have one lens that has them, and I forget they're there, and I end up bumping into them, and it changes things on me. I just don't like it. I'd shut them off. So that's that one off too. Next is the lens memory set button. Some lenses have a memory set button over here. A lot of them don't. Some of the ones I own do, some of them don't. So I just put that to recall focus position. One of the problems with programming buttons to lenses is that you don't get consistency because every lens has seemingly a different set of buttons on it. So I don't put a lot of critical functions out there on the lenses. So I have that as recall focus position so that it's kind of convenient if I feel like it's a long reach up to the lens function 2 button, I can just hit it with my finger over here sometimes. So again, it's kind of a button that I don't have on everything, so I don't really put anything critical there. And finally we have, oops, I went too far. Finally, we have the control ring. That's this ring. Every lens has those. And I have mine set to ISO sensitivity simply because I shoot manual a lot and I find it's very convenient to be able to do that. But when I'm in manual with auto ISO, it ignores whatever ISO I happen to set. It uses what it needs, whether, I can jack that all the way up to 25,000 or whatever. And if the camera needs 200, it's going to use 200. It's going to ignore that setting. But when I'm actually shooting in manual, then I can grab the control ring and I can adjust my ISO very quickly, very easily as I'm shooting right on the fly there. So I can make exposure adjustments literally as a bird's flying in some cases. So that's pretty cool. I like having ISO there. Now, some people use exposure compensation there. So, your call. I find when it's set to exposure compensation, though, I kind of tap it a little bit too easily. I bump it too easily. So I don't like I don't like that with exposure comp, but you can give it a try either way, see what you like. And again, there are a lot of other options for these overrides. This is working well for me, and I go over those other options in the guidebook, of course, but let's move on here. We have that all set up. Custom controls playback. I don't really change much here. About the only thing I go through, I think I may have a couple other ones I might add to this once I get the book out, but the subcommand dial, the front one here, I do like to change the frame advance from either 10 to 50, depending on, I guess, the mood of the day. But the back dial here, if you're playing your images back in the main command dial, if you click through there, it'll go one at a time. By default, this is set to one at a time. That's kind of redundant. So sometimes you just need to get through a bunch of images to get to a section that you want to look at, right? So you can use the front one to kind of do that then, if it's set to 10 or 50 or whatever there. So that's how I do it. Moving back out, touch function. You're going to like this one. This is kind of new and shiny and all that good stuff. If it's on, you can do some cool things. Now, I'm going to say this before we get in here so I don't forget, but if you find that it's more annoying, your nose is making things happen back here on the screen, you might just come in and shut this off. Like it's moving your AF point around or something, so you might want to shut that off. But here's how I have it set up right now. It's kind of fun. I'm trying it. I don't know if I'm going to love it yet. I'll have probably better conclusions once I have more time with this in the field. But we have assign touch function, and we have a bunch of different things here. I have it on move focus point, okay? And, there's some other things you can do here, but I like this one because what we can do, we can define a touch area on the back of the screen here. And I'm going to define that. I'm going to use wide orientation. I'm going to use the right half of the screen. And tall orientation is just going to mimic that, same as wide orientation. So it's going to use this right-hand side of the screen regardless of whether it's up or down. And what you can do with this is, once this is all set and you're shooting, you can put your thumb over here and you can move your AF point around the screen by just rubbing on the back LCD here. That's a weird way to say it, right? Rubbing on the back LCD. But you can just kind of move your AF point around by moving your thumb on the rear LCD, which is pretty cool. I've been playing with it. I can't decide if I like it better than the joystick or not yet, but maybe with some practice, it'll work out for me. But that's kind of a cool feature. Definitely try that out. Make sure that's on. And I tried it with just the upper quadrant, this option here, the default one, top right quadrant, and I found it was too small. So I found right half works pretty well. So something to try. I don't do control lock, reverse dial rotation, I leave them alone. Release button to use, dial. I like this one a lot. I turn this on. Basically what this does, and this, I'm going to tell you, it takes some getting used to, okay? But what this does is you press a button, like the video record button, for instance, is set for autofocus. I can press that button, I can release that button, and then I can turn my dial, and I can just cycle through. I don't have to keep holding the button down. Same with exposure compensation and ISO. So once I press that button and release it, I can go ahead and do my thing. Unfortunately, no, it does not work with override. So if you have an AF override, it doesn't mean you can press Fn1 and release it and it'll stick, unfortunately. But it is handy for some of these other settings so that you're not trying to, do finger gymnastics as you're pressing buttons and turning dials. It does take some getting used to. At first I tried it, I hated it, and then I gave it another try a couple years later. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. Once you get used to it, you like it. To get back out of the whatever mode you've set. So if I press this button, I'm setting the AF areas. Once I have it set, I just press the button again or give a half press on the shutter release, and it'll go back to normal function for the dials. So pretty cool. Give it a try. I think you'll like it. I don't do any of that. Focus ring rotation range. I leave this on non-linear, and what that means is that the faster you turn this, the faster the camera focuses the lens. The slower you turn it, the slower it does. So it makes it easier when you're trying to fine-tune, I think. But if you would prefer a more linear approach, you can go in here and decide how many degrees it should be from infinity to minimum focus distance. But me, I like non-linear. Control ring response, I like to go low, believe it or not. just because I find it a little bit too touchy at high. I find that things happen too fast. I don't want to whip through my ISOs on my control ring. I want to kind of gradually adjust that. I usually need a third of a step. I don't need like 2 at once or something. So I leave that on low. And I prefer sub-selector center on. I just like to make sure that everyone knows to leave that on because that makes it easier to press the joystick. It's not quite so sensitive, even though I still messes up for me. But definitely leave that on. And believe it or not, that concludes our setup guide. I hope you've watched all 4 videos. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you for tolerating me for this long. But again, that setup guide is going to have so much more information. That's coming out hopefully in September. I'm working on it right now. But as always, I hope you'll stop by the site, sign up for the free email newsletter, subscribe, like it, tell your friends about this video series, please. It makes a big difference to me. And as always, have a great day.